My sister Grace called me crying from federal prison intake, begging me to make it all go away. The same sister who'd spent 32 years being groomed as the heir to our father's real estate empire, while I was told to be grateful for scraps. The same sister who tried to destroy everything I'd built from nothing because she couldn't stand that I'd succeeded without the family name. I told her exactly what she'd told me when I was 23 and begging for just one chance to prove myself to our parents. You made your choice. Live with it. If you've ever been the invisible child in a family that picked their favorite before you could even walk, hit that like button right now. And if you want to hear how the forgotten daughter became the one holding all the cards while the golden child got a felony record, make sure you subscribe because this story is about to get very, very dark. I need you to understand something about the Larson family of Park City, Utah. We weren't just wealthy. We were the kind of wealthy where your last name opened doors before you even knocked. My father, Richard Larson, didn't just own property. He owned the companies that developed the properties that shaped entire counties. Shopping centers, luxury resorts, those massive planned communities with names like Aspen Heights and Silver Creek Estates. That was us. Or rather, that was him and his chosen successor, my younger sister Grace, the miracle child who arrived 3 years after me and immediately became the center of my parents' universe. I remember the exact moment I understood my place in the family hierarchy. I was 7 years old, sitting at our massive dining table that could seat 20, but usually just held the 4 of us at one end. I'd just won the state science fair with a project about water conservation in mountain communities. My teacher had called me gifted, said I had a remarkable understanding of environmental systems for someone so young. I was bursting with pride, waiting for my father to come home so I could show him the trophy. When he finally walked through the door at 9:30 that night, still in his Armani suit that cost more than most people's cars, I ran to him with the trophy held high. He patted my head absently, his eyes already moving past me to where 4-year-old Grace was coloring at the coffee table. "That's nice, Whitney," he said. Then his whole face transformed as he swooped Grace up into his arms. "And how's my little CEO today? Did you help Mommy pick out the tile for the Henderson project like I asked?" That's nice, Whitney. 3 words that would define the next 20 years of my life. Every achievement, every accomplishment, every desperate attempt to earn their attention was met with those 3 words or some variation of them. Meanwhile, Grace was enrolled in private business camps at age 8. She had her own office at Dad's company by 14. Not a real office where she did actual work, but a space where she could learn by observing. She sat in board meetings while I was told my presence would be distracting. By the time she was 16, Dad was introducing her at charity galas as the future of Larson development, while I stood in the background, holding my mother's purse. My mother, Catherine, was perhaps worse than my father because she pretended to care. She'd pull me aside with these fake concerned looks and say things like, "Whitney, honey, you need to understand that Grace just has a natural gift for business, but you're very creative. Maybe you could help with the company's holiday parties?" As if my worth could be measured in my ability to pick centerpieces. She'd buy me expensive clothes and jewelry, thinking that material things could fill the gaping hole where parental love should have been. I had a trust fund, sure. I had a car at 16, a black Range Rover that I didn't ask for and barely drove. But I would have traded it all for one genuine moment of them seeing me as more than Grace's older sister, the spare child, the one who came before they got it right. The thing is, I was brilliant. I don't say that to brag, it's just a fact that everyone except my family seemed to recognize. While Grace was being groomed to inherit an empire built by someone else, I was teaching myself to code at 15. I understood systems, patterns, the way technology could transform industries that had been stagnant for decades. I saw the future in data analytics and AI before most people even knew what those terms meant. My computer science teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, even came to our house once to personally discuss scholarship opportunities at MIT and Stanford. My father listened politely, then asked Mr. Rodriguez if he'd like to see Grace's portfolio of business plans she'd been working on since she was 12.
By senior year of high school, the pattern was so established that even the household staff understood it. Grace's accomplishments were celebrated with parties and press releases. Mine were acknowledged with gift cards slipped under my bedroom door. Grace's friends were welcomed into our home like future business partners. Mine were treated like potential security risks. Grace's dreams were investments. Mine were hobbies. Grace was the sun in the Larson solar system, and I was just a lonely planet in a deteriorating orbit, slowly drifting into the cold. College was my first taste of what it felt like to be seen. At the University of Colorado Boulder, professors actually listened when I talked. My ideas had merit based on their own value, not on my position in some predetermined family hierarchy. I double majored in computer science and environmental engineering, and for the first time in my life, I excelled at something that no one could attribute to my last name or my father's connections. I built things, real things, programs that could analyze watershed data in real time, algorithms that could predict wildfire spread patterns based on historical weather data and topography. My senior thesis advisor called my work revolutionary and helped me file my first patent application. That's when I made my biggest mistake. I went home with a business plan. I was 22 years old, about to graduate summa cum laude, and I genuinely thought that if I could just show my father the numbers, the projections, the potential, he'd finally see me as more than Grace's disappointment of an older sister. I'd spent 6 months developing a comprehensive business proposal for a company I wanted to call Summit Guard Technologies. The concept was elegant in its simplicity: use AI and environmental monitoring systems to help property developers, government agencies, and insurance companies assess and mitigate risks in mountain regions. Avalanche prediction, wildfire management, water resource monitoring, structural integrity assessments for buildings in extreme weather conditions. Everything my father's company needed, but was too traditional to implement. I practiced my presentation for weeks. I had slides, financial projections, letters of interest from potential government clients, even a working prototype that could analyze and predict snow load risks on commercial structures. I scheduled a formal meeting with him, not as his daughter, but as an entrepreneur seeking an investor. I wore my best suit, the one I'd bought with money I'd earned from freelance coding projects, not from my trust fund. I wanted to prove that I could stand on my own merit. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Thursday in his office at Larson Development Headquarters, a gleaming glass tower in downtown Salt Lake City that you could see from 20 miles away on a clear day. I arrived 15 minutes early and sat in the waiting area, my hands sweating as I clutched my laptop bag. His assistant, Martha, who'd worked for him for 15 years, gave me a sympathetic smile. "He's running a bit late from lunch with Grace," she said softly. "They're discussing her taking over the residential development division." 45 minutes later, my father finally walked in with Grace trailing behind him, both of them laughing about something from their lunch. Grace was 19, dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, her blonde hair perfectly styled in a way mine never quite managed to achieve. She looked at me with that particular expression she'd perfected over the years, a mixture of pity and amusement, like a dog trying to walk on its hind legs. Cute attempt, but ultimately unnatural. "Whitney," my father said, as if he'd forgotten I was coming. "Right, your little project. Come on in. Grace, you might as well sit in on this. Good experience for you to see different types of pitches."
Your little project. He'd already dismissed it before I'd even opened my mouth. But I pushed forward, because what else could I do? I'd come this far. I set up my laptop, pulled up my presentation, and began talking about the future of property development, about how environmental technology could save companies millions in prevention costs, about the government contracts already expressing interest. I showed him the prototype, demonstrated how it could analyze the structural risks on one of his own properties using publicly available data. I explained how Summit Guard could be a subsidiary of Larson Development, how it could position the company as an industry leader in sustainable development practices.
20 minutes into my hour-long presentation, my father held up his hand. "Whitney, stop." He was looking at his phone, not at me. "This is all very ambitious, but honestly, it's not what Larson Development does. We build things, real things. We don't chase after government contracts with computer programs." He looked up at me then, and there was something almost like irritation in his eyes. "If you wanted to contribute to the family business, why didn't you study something useful? Finance, like Grace, real estate law, even architecture would have been more practical than this, what did you call it, environmental engineering?" Grace leaned forward, her voice dripping with false concern. "I think what Dad's trying to say, Whitney, is that maybe you should get some real-world experience first. Maybe work for an established tech company for a few years. Learn how business actually works." She was 19 years old, had never held a job that wasn't handed to her by our father, and she was lecturing me about real-world experience. My father nodded approvingly at Grace's input. "Exactly right, Princess." Princess. He called her Princess in a business meeting. "Whitney, why don't you take some time to figure out what you really want to do? The trust fund is there if you need it. Maybe travel for a bit. Find yourself?" He was already standing up, the meeting over in his mind. "Grace and I have a site inspection at 3. Martha can validate your parking on the way out." I sat there for a moment, my laptop still open to a slide showing projected revenues of $40 million in year 3. All those months of work, all that hope that maybe, finally, I could show them I was worth something. Grace stood up, smoothing her skirt, and paused beside my chair. She leaned down and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, but not our father, "Did you really think he'd invest in you over me? That's adorable." That's when something inside me finally broke, or maybe it finally fixed itself. I closed my laptop, gathered my things, and stood up. My father was already by the door, checking his phone again, probably forgetting I was even there. "You're right," I said quietly. Both of them turned to look at me, surprised. I do need to figure out what I really want. I looked directly at my father. And what I want is to build something without the Larson name, without your money, without your approval. I turned to Grace, and definitely without your permission. My father laughed, actually laughed. "Whitney, don't be dramatic. You've never built anything on your own. You wouldn't last 6 months without the family's support." I shouldered my laptop bag and walked past them toward the door. As I reached the threshold, I turned back one more time. They were both watching me with identical expressions of amused disbelief, like I'd just announced I was going to become a professional unicorn trainer. "Oh, and Dad, that property you just approved for development near Park City, the one Grace recommended, the Meadowbrook project, my prototype shows a 73% chance of catastrophic flooding within 5 years based on climate change models and upstream development, but I'm sure Grace's intuition is just as good as my data." The last thing I saw before the door closed was my father's face shifting from amusement to something else. Maybe concern, maybe anger, maybe just annoyance that I'd had the audacity to contradict Grace. But it didn't matter anymore, because that was the day I decided to stop being Whitney Larson, disappointment daughter, and start becoming someone else entirely, someone they wouldn't see coming. I moved out of my apartment in Park City that night, didn't even pack everything, just grabbed my clothes, my computer equipment, and my engineering textbooks. I left behind everything with the Larson name on it, everything that had been given to me as a consolation prize for not being Grace. The jewelry, the designer bags, the keys to the Range Rover, I left it all on the dining room table with a note that simply said, "I won't be needing these anymore." I didn't touch the trust fund. I didn't take a penny of their money. If I was going to prove them wrong, I was going to do it completely on my own terms. The first 6 months were brutal. I moved to Denver, partly because it was far enough from Utah that I wouldn't run into anyone from my parents' circle, and partly because Colorado was investing heavily in environmental technology initiatives. I rented a studio apartment in a building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's TV through them, and the heating system made noises like a dying animal. But it was mine. I paid for it with money I earned from freelance coding jobs I found online, building websites and debugging software for startups that couldn't afford full-time developers. I lived on ramen noodles and dollar menu items, saving every penny I could for Summit Guard. During the day, I applied for grants, pitched to investors, and refined my technology. At night, I coded until my eyes burned, building the platform that would eventually revolutionize environmental monitoring in mountain regions. I taught myself everything, not just the technical stuff, but the business side too. Contract law from YouTube videos and library books, marketing from free online courses, accounting from trial and error, and a lot of Google searches at 2 a.m. 8 months after I left home, I had my first breakthrough. A small Colorado town dealing with repeated avalanche closures on their main commercial route wanted a better prediction system. They couldn't afford much, $20,000 for a 6-month pilot program, but it was real. It was validation. It was proof that Summit Guard wasn't just some naive college student's pipe dream. The system I built for them reduced false closure alerts by 60% and prevented 2 potentially catastrophic incidents. The local newspaper ran a story about it. Young entrepreneurs' AI system saves lives and money in mountain towns. They didn't mention the Larson name once because I didn't tell them about it. I was just Whitney Irwin by then, using my middle name as my last name. That article caught the attention of someone at the Colorado State Department of Natural Resources. They wanted a proposal for a larger system, something that could monitor wildfire risks across multiple counties. The contract would be worth $200,000. It was everything I'd been working toward, the validation that Summit Guard could be something real, something substantial. I spent 3 weeks preparing that proposal, barely sleeping, living on coffee and determination. I was going to submit it on a Monday morning. On Sunday night, my laptop was stolen. Not just stolen. Someone broke into my apartment while I was at the laundromat down the street. They took my laptop, my backup drives, even the notebooks where I'd handwritten portions of code and business strategies. But they left my TV, left the $40 in cash sitting on my kitchen counter, left everything that a normal thief would take. This wasn't random. Someone had specifically targeted my work. All of it. Gone. 3 years of development. The proposal that was due in 18 hours. The prototype code that I'd been refining since college. Everything that Summit Guard was built on had just vanished. I sat on my floor that night, surrounded by the mess the thief had left behind, and I sobbed. Not pretty, delicate tears, but body-shaking, can't-breathe, snot running down my face sobbing. Because I knew, somewhere in my bones, I knew this wasn't a coincidence. The timing was too perfect, the target too specific. Someone had sabotaged me. Someone who knew exactly what I was working on and exactly how to hurt me most. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Whitney? It was Grace. Of course it was Grace. I heard you've been having a tough time out there on your own. Dad's worried about you. We all are. Why don't you come home? There's a position open in our marketing department. Entry level, but you could work your way up if you prove yourself. The offer won't stay open forever. I hung up without saying a word. Then I did something I'd never done before in my life. I stood up, walked to my bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, red eyes, tangled hair, looking like I'd aged 5 years since the 8 months I'd left home, and I made myself a promise. I said it out loud to my reflection. They think they've won. They think I'll come crawling back, but I'm going to build this company from scratch if I have to write every line of code again from memory. And when I succeed, not if, when, they're going to realize they declared war on the wrong daughter. That's when I heard something that changed everything. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, a 70-year-old retired programmer who'd worked for IBM back in the day, knocked on my door. Whitney, dear, she said, holding a flash drive, I hope you don't mind, but I've been backing up your work to my cloud server. Old habit from my debugging days, always have a backup of the backup. I heard the break-in earlier and thought you might need this.
I stared at that flash drive like it was the holy grail. Mrs. Chen, this sweet elderly woman who I'd barely exchanged more than pleasantries with in the hallway, had just saved my entire future. You backed up my work? My voice cracked. She smiled and patted my cheek with a weathered hand that had probably typed more code than I could imagine. Dear, I recognize obsession when I see it. You remind me of myself 40 years ago, coding through the night, determined to prove everyone wrong. I could hear you typing through these thin walls at all hours. When someone works that hard, their work deserves to be protected. She glanced at my ransacked apartment. Seems like someone doesn't want you to succeed. In my experience, that means you're doing something right. That flash drive had everything up until 3 days ago. I lost some recent work, but the core of Summit Guard was intact. I submitted the proposal to the Colorado Department of Natural Resources 30 minutes before the deadline, running on pure adrenaline and spite. Then I waited, and waited, and waited some more. 3 weeks later, I got the call. They wanted to move forward, but had concerns. Concerns that seemed oddly specific. We've received some information suggesting you may not have the resources to complete a project of this scope, the procurement officers said carefully. There are questions about your company's stability, your experience, your backing. We'll need additional guarantees. Someone had been whispering in ears. Someone had been planting seeds of doubt. But I couldn't prove it, couldn't fight shadows and rumors. So I did what I'd been doing since I left home. I worked harder. I partnered with a local engineering firm to provide the stability they wanted, giving up 30% of the contract value just to get my foot in the door. It hurt watching money I desperately needed go to someone else just because they had an established reputation, but it was better than nothing. The project launched, and it worked beautifully, better than promised. The wildfire prediction system caught 2 incidents before they spread, saving the state millions in firefighting costs. But every victory came with a new obstacle. When I applied for a federal small business grant, my application was mysteriously delayed due to paperwork inconsistencies that didn't exist. When I tried to lease office space to expand beyond my apartment, 3 different landlords suddenly decided they'd found other tenants after initially agreeing to terms. When I finally found a space, a run-down office in an industrial area that no one else wanted, the bank suddenly had concerns about my loan application, despite my perfect credit and growing revenue. I knew it was them. I couldn't prove it, but I knew. The Larson family had connections everywhere: real estate, banking, government contracts. These were all spaces where a few phone calls from Richard Larson could create infinite obstacles. But here's the thing about obstacles. They teach you to be creative. Can't get a traditional business loan? I learned about alternative financing, found angel investors who cared more about innovation than pedigree. Can't lease premium office space? I made that industrial space work, turned it into something quirky and innovative that actually attracted the kind of talent I needed. Every roadblock they threw at me just taught me a new way around. 2 years into building Summit Guard, I met Christopher. He was a structural engineer consulting on a project where my monitoring systems were being installed. He didn't know anything about the Larson family, didn't care about Utah real estate dynasties. To him, I was just Whitney Irwin, the slightly manic CEO who worked 18-hour days and could explain complex algorithms while simultaneously debugging code and eating cold Chinese takeout. He asked me out after a particularly long planning session where I'd spent 3 hours passionately arguing about load-bearing calculations in extreme weather conditions. Anyone who gets that excited about structural stress patterns is someone I need to know better, he said. I told him everything on our 4th date, about my family, about Grace, and about why I really never talked about my past. I expected him to run, to decide I had too much baggage, too many complications. Instead, he said, "So you walked away from millions of dollars and a guaranteed easy life to build something from scratch just to prove you could? That's the sexiest thing I've ever heard." We were married a year later in a courthouse ceremony with just his sister and Mrs. Chen as witnesses. I legally changed my last name to his, Irwin, and felt like I was finally completely free from the Larson shadow.
Summit Guard was growing, slowly, painfully, with setbacks at every turn, but growing. We had contracts with 6 counties in Colorado, 2 in Wyoming, and were bidding on a major federal contract with the Forest Service. I had 12 employees, all of them brilliant people who believed in what we were building. We were making a difference, saving lives, protecting property, doing exactly what I'd told my father we could do 3 years earlier. I even started allowing myself to think I'd won, that I'd proved them wrong and could just focus on building my company without looking over my shoulder. Then Grace called again. It had been 3 years since the locktop theft, since that night she'd offered me an entry-level marketing position like it was charity. This time, her voice was different, harder. "Congratulations on your little forest contract," she said. I hadn't announced the Forest Service bid publicly. We hadn't won it yet. The fact that she knew about it made my blood run cold. "Dad's proud of you, you know. He always knew you'd do something adequate." "What do you want, Grace?" I kept my voice steady, professional, even though my hand was shaking. "I want you to know that Larson Development is also bidding on that contract. Well, not directly. Through our new subsidiary, Mountain Environmental Solutions, we've been developing some interesting technology over the past few years. Very innovative, very similar to what you've been working on actually, but with the resources to actually deliver at scale." She paused, letting that sink in. "Funny how good ideas tend to emerge in multiple places at once, isn't it?" They'd stolen my work. The laptop, the break-in, they'd taken my early code, my algorithms, my entire concept, and they'd had 3 years to reverse engineer it with unlimited resources. "You can't be serious," I said. "That's my technology, my patents." "Your provisional patents that you couldn't afford to fully file? The ones that expired 6 months ago because you couldn't pay the fees while you were struggling to make payroll? Those patents?" She laughed, and it was our mother's laugh, pretty and poisonous. "Whitney, you really should have taken that marketing position. At least then you'd be part of the winning team." I hung up and immediately called my lawyer, a friend from college who was helping me for basically free because he believed in what I was doing. "Can they do this?" I asked. He sighed. "If they've modified the code enough, if they've added their own innovations, and if your patents weren't fully protected, yeah, they can. It would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees just to fight it, and even then, you'd probably lose." The Forest Service contract went to Mountain Environmental Solutions. $8 million that should have transformed Summit Guard instead went to my family's fake subsidiary. But here is where Grace made her first real mistake. She got cocky. The Forest Service contract required regular performance reports, public documentation of system effectiveness, and the system they'd built from my stolen code, they didn't understand it well enough to maintain it properly. Within 6 months, they had 3 major prediction failures. Not catastrophic, no one died, but enough that the Forest Service started asking questions. I knew because one of my former employees, someone who jumped ship to Mountain Environmental Solutions for triple the salary I could offer, called me. "Whitney, I'm probably breaking my NDA, but you need to know what they're doing. They're blaming the failures on your original code. They're saying the foundation was flawed, that you're the reason the system doesn't work. They're going to use this to destroy Summit Guard's reputation, so you can't bid on federal contracts anymore." That's when I realized this wasn't just about competition or even family dynamics. This was about complete annihilation. Grace didn't just want to beat me, she wanted to erase me. She wanted to take my work, claim it as her own, fail with it, and then blame me for the failure. It was elegant in its cruelty. Except she'd forgotten one thing. The original code she'd stolen? I'd kept evolving it. The system Summit Guard was running now was generations beyond what they'd taken, and I could prove it. I started documenting everything. Every iteration of my code, every timestamp, every improvement. I compiled a massive report showing exactly how Mountain Environmental Solutions had copied my early work and why their failures were due to their own incompetence in implementation, not flaws in the original design. I sent it to every contact I had in the industry, every government procurement officer, every journalist who'd ever written about environmental technology. It was professional, factual, and devastating. The response was immediate. The Forest Service launched an investigation. Industry publications started asking uncomfortable questions about mountain environmental solutions' sudden emergence in a specialized field. But instead of backing down, my family doubled down. Richard Larson himself gave an interview to the Utah Business Journal, where he talked about how unfortunate it was that his estranged daughter was struggling to accept healthy competition and making baseless accusations out of jealousy. He actually said on record that I was emotionally unstable and had always resented Grace's natural business acumen. That interview was published on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, I got a cease and desist letter from Larson Development's legal team. They were threatening to sue me for defamation, for trade disparagement, for tortious interference with their business relationships. The letter was signed by Harrison Pike, one of the most expensive corporate lawyers in the Mountain States. The message was clear: stop talking or we'll bury you in legal fees until Summit Guard goes bankrupt. Christopher found me crying in our bedroom that night, the cease and desist letter crumpled in my fist. "We can't fight them," I said. "They have unlimited resources. They'll drain us dry just in legal fees, and Grace knows it. She's won. They've all won." He held me while I sobbed, then said something that changed everything. "You know, my cousin works for the Bureau of Land Management. They're looking for a comprehensive monitoring system for all federal lands in the western states. It's a massive contract, $100 million plus over 5 years. They specifically want a company with a proven track record of successful implementation and innovation. The bid opens next month." He paused, looking at the crumpled letter. Mountain Environmental Solutions' failures with the Forest Service would probably disqualify them. Just saying. I sat up, wiping my eyes. The Bureau of Land Management, BLM. They managed more land than any other federal agency, hundreds of millions of acres across the West. A contract with them wouldn't just transform Summit Guard, it would establish us as the dominant player in environmental monitoring technology. It was exactly the kind of contract that could make us too big for even the Larson family to destroy. But it was also impossibly competitive. Every major tech company with an environmental division would be bidding. "We'd need partners," I said, my mind already racing. "Established companies who could vouch for our stability. We'd need to show we could scale up dramatically, handle the infrastructure requirements. We'd need—" I stopped. "We'd need everything I don't have, because my family has spent 5 years sabotaging every relationship I try to build." That's when Christopher showed me something on his laptop. It was an email from 3 weeks ago that he hadn't told me about. "I've been getting calls," he said quietly. "Companies wanting to partner with Summit Guard. They've been watching what you've built, how you've survived everything thrown at you. They're impressed. They want in." The email was from the CEO of a major environmental consulting firm. There were others behind it: engineers, scientists, former government officials who'd gone into private consulting, people who'd been watching from the sidelines as I fought my family tooth and nail for every inch of ground. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because you would have thought it was charity. You would have said no out of pride. But Whitney, it's not charity. These people have seen your work. They've seen what Summit Guard can do when you're not being sabotaged at every turn. They want to be part of something revolutionary, and they think you're the one to lead it." He pulled up another email. "This came today. It's from a forensic accountant who used to work for the FBI. She says she's been following the situation with Mountain Environmental Solutions. She thinks there's something bigger going on, something beyond just stolen code." The accountant's name was Sarah Chen, no relation to my neighbor, just a cosmic coincidence. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Denver, one of those places that's too loud for anyone to overhear conversations. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of stillness that made you think she was cataloging every detail around her. "I've been tracking Larson Development's financial patterns," she said without preamble. the creation of Mountain Environmental Solutions, the timing of their technology development, the sudden influx of capital right around the time your laptop was stolen. It's not just corporate espionage. There are irregularities that suggest financial fraud, possibly money laundering through the subsidiary. My coffee went cold as she laid out what she'd found: shell companies, offshore accounts, transactions that didn't match reported revenues. It wasn't just about Grace stealing my technology, it was about using that theft to cover something much bigger. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I believe in justice," she said simply, "and because I think you're about to be the key to exposing something that goes way beyond a family feud. Your success with the BLM contract would put you in a position where you couldn't be ignored or silenced anymore. It would make you dangerous to them." She pulled up another email. "This came today. It's from a forensic accountant who used to work for the FBI. She says she's been following the situation with Mountain Environmental Solutions. She thinks there's something bigger going on, something beyond just stolen code." The accountant's name was Sarah Chen. No relation to my neighbor, just a cosmic coincidence. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Denver, one of those places that's too loud for anyone to overhear conversations. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of stillness that made you think she was cataloging every detail around her. "I've been tracking Larson Development's financial patterns," she said without preamble. "The creation of Mountain Environmental Solutions, the timing of their technology development, the sudden influx of capital right around the time your laptop was stolen. It's not just corporate espionage. There are irregularities that suggest financial fraud, possibly money laundering through the subsidiary." My coffee went cold as she laid out what she'd found: shell companies, offshore accounts, transactions that didn't match reported revenues. It wasn't just about Grace stealing my technology, it was about using that theft to cover something much bigger. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I believe in justice," she said simply, "and because I think you're about to be the key to exposing something that goes way beyond a family feud. Your success with the BLM contract would put you in a position where you couldn't be ignored or silenced anymore. It would make you dangerous to them." She pulled up another email. "This came today. It's from a forensic accountant who used to work for the FBI. She says she's been following the situation with Mountain Environmental Solutions. She thinks there's something bigger going on, something beyond just stolen code." That night, I called a meeting with my entire team. 12 people crammed into our conference room that was really just a converted storage space with a whiteboard and mismatched chairs. I told them everything: about my family, about the theft, about the sabotage, about the BLM contract that could change everything. "If we go for this, they're going to come at us with everything they have. It's going to get ugly. Some of you might get better offers from competitors. Some of you might get threatened. I can't promise it'll be easy, and I can't promise we'll win, but I can promise that if we do win, we'll have built something that matters." Not one person left. Instead, my lead developer Marcus, a quiet guy who'd been with me since year 2, stood up. "Whitney, do you know why I turned down a job at Google to work here? Because you gave me a chance when no one else would. I was a college dropout with a criminal record for a stupid mistake I made at 19. You looked at my code, not my past. You've built a company where people matter more than pedigrees. So yeah, I'm in. Let's show those bastards what Summit Guard can really do." One by one, everyone else stood up too. The kid fresh out of college who'd been sleeping in his car before I hired him. The 50-year-old engineer who'd been laid off and told she was too old to learn new systems. The immigrant programmer who'd been told his accent would hold him back in client meetings. My island of misfit toys, as Grace would probably call them. My family, as I called them. The real one. The one I chose and who'd chosen me back. We had 6 weeks to prepare the most important proposal of our lives. 6 weeks to show that a company started in a studio apartment with stolen code and sabotaged contracts could compete with the biggest players in the industry. 6 weeks to prove that Whitney Irwin was more than just Richard Larson's forgotten daughter. And somewhere in those 6 weeks, I got a call that changed the game entirely. It was from someone at Mountain Environmental Solutions, someone high up, someone with access to everything. They wanted to meet, and they had information about Grace's plan to ensure Summit Guard never got the chance to bid on the BLM contract. "She knows you're going to bid," the voice said. It was disguised, modulated, but something about the cadence was familiar. "Meet me tomorrow night, and I'll tell you everything."
The meeting was set for an abandoned warehouse in Commerce City, one of those places where Denver's industrial optimism had died decades ago. Every instinct I had screamed that this was a trap, but I went anyway. Christopher wanted to come with me, but I couldn't risk it. If something happened to me, Summit Guard needed him to continue. I parked 3 blocks away and walked, my phone recording everything, location shared with my lawyer, Sarah Chen, and Christopher. The October wind cut through my jacket like accusations I couldn't quite hear yet. The figure waiting inside was wrapped in shadows and a heavy coat, but when they spoke again, I knew who it was. Martha, my father's assistant, the woman who'd given me sympathetic smiles for 20 years while watching my family destroy me piece by piece. "Hello, Whitney," she said, pulling back her hood. Her face looked older, tired, like carrying other people's secrets had aged her prematurely. "I'm sorry for the dramatics, but I couldn't risk them knowing I'd contacted you." "Why now?" I asked, keeping my distance, my hand on my phone in my pocket. "You've watched them hurt me for years. Why do you suddenly care?" She laughed bitterly. "Care? I've always cared, but I also have 2 kids and no college degree, and your father paid me enough to keep them housed and fed. I told myself it was just family drama, not my business. But this?" She pulled out a folder, thick with documents. "This crosses a line even I can't ignore. They're not just trying to compete with you anymore, Whitney. They're going to destroy you with a lie so big you'll never recover from it." The documents she handed me made my blood freeze in my veins. It was a bankruptcy petition, already drawn up, with my name and Summit Guard Technologies listed as the debtor. But that wasn't the worst part. The creditor claiming I owed them money was Grace Larson, personally. According to these documents, she had loaned me $2 million in startup funds for Summit Guard, money I'd never repaid, money that, with interest and penalties, now totaled nearly $3 million. There were promissory notes with my signature, bank records showing transfers, even emails supposedly from me begging Grace for money and promising to pay her back with interest. "This is insane," I said, my voice shaking. "I never took a penny from them. I specifically never took money from them. These signatures, these emails, they're all fake." Martha nodded. "I know. I watched Grace practice your signature for 3 weeks. She had your old journals from high school, spent hours perfecting it. The emails were created using a spoofed account, backdated using some tech specialist they hired. The bank records are from a shell account they created in your name using information from when you were still on the family trust documents." She pulled out another paper. "This is the timeline. They're filing next Monday, the day before the BLM proposal is due. Once you're in bankruptcy proceedings, you can't bid on federal contracts. Even if you eventually prove it's fraudulent, it'll be too late. The contract will go to someone else, probably Mountain Environmental Solutions, as the backup bidder." I sank onto a dusty crate, the weight of their plan crushing me. It was perfect in its evil simplicity. They wouldn't need to prove the debt was real in the long term. They just needed to create enough legal chaos to knock me out of the running for the contract that would save my company. "Do you have proof? Real proof that this is fabricated?" Martha pulled out a flash drive, similar to the one Sarah Chen had given me. "Everything's on here. Emails between Grace and your parents planning this, the contact information for the forger they hired, screenshots of Grace literally practicing your signature with templates, voice recordings of your father discussing how to make the bankruptcy filing look legitimate. 3 years of evidence that I've been collecting because I knew someday they'd go too far." She paused, looking older than her 60 years. "I'm giving this to you at great personal cost. If they find out, I'll lose everything. But what they're doing isn't just wrong, Whitney. It's criminal, and someone needs to stop them."
"Why didn't you just go to the authorities?" I asked. "With what standing?" I'm just an assistant who illegally recorded her employers. The recordings might not even be admissible. But you're the victim. You can use this to defend yourself, to show a pattern of harassment and fraud. Your lawyer can make this work in ways I never could." She stood to go, then turned back. "There's something else. The forensic accountant you've been talking to, Sarah Chen, she's right about the money laundering. Mountain Environmental Solutions is a front. They've been using it to clean money from some very questionable real estate deals your father made with foreign investors. The FBI is already sniffing around, but they don't have enough yet. This bankruptcy fraud might be the thread that unravels everything." After Martha left, I sat in that warehouse for an hour, staring at the documents, feeling the weight of what was coming. They were going to file fraudulent bankruptcy proceedings against me in 4 days. I had 4 days to prepare a defense against something they'd been planning for months, maybe years. 4 days to gather enough counter-evidence to stop them from destroying everything I'd built. 4 days to finally fight back in a way that mattered. I called Christopher first. "How fast can you get home?" I asked. "And can you bring your cousin from the BLM?" Then I called my lawyer, David Park, who'd been with me since the beginning. "David, I need you to clear your schedule for the next week, all of it. And I need you to bring in the best bankruptcy attorney you know. Money's no object." That was a lie. Money was very much an object, but I'd figure that out later. Finally, I called Sarah Chen. "That evidence you've been gathering about Larson Development, I think it's about to become very relevant. Can you meet me tonight?" We turned my apartment into a war room. Christopher and I pushed all the furniture against the walls and set up tables, laptops, printers, and a massive whiteboard where we mapped out everything. David arrived with Emily Castro, a bankruptcy attorney who looked like she ate corporate lawyers for breakfast and used their bones as toothpicks. Sarah Chen brought her own team of 2 junior analysts she trusted. By midnight, we had 8 people working on unraveling 3 years of my family's lies. Emily was the first to spot the critical flaw in their plan. "These bank records," she said, pointing at the supposed transfers from Grace to me, "they show the money coming from an account at First Mountain Bank, but look at the account number. First Mountain Bank doesn't use that numbering system, never has. It's from their competitor, Rocky Peak Financial, just with First Mountain's routing number added. This is amateur hour forgery, but sophisticated enough that it might fool a quick review." She smiled, and it was terrifying. "Lucky for us, I used to work for Rocky Peak. I can get verification that this account never existed by morning." David was reviewing the promissory notes with a magnifying glass, comparing them to samples of my actual signature from legal documents. "The pressure patterns are all wrong," he muttered. "Whoever forged these pressed too hard on the upstrokes, too light on the downs. It's a good forgery to the naked eye, but any forensic handwriting expert will spot this in seconds. I know a guy who can have a preliminary report ready by Sunday." Sarah Chen and her team were diving into the email headers, tracking IP addresses and server logs. These emails, supposedly from Whitney, were all created on the same day, 2 weeks ago, then backdated. The metadata is screaming forgery. Plus, they originated from an IP address registered to a coffee shop 2 blocks from Larson Development headquarters. Not exactly subtle. But the real goldmine was Martha's recordings. We sat in stunned silence listening to my father's voice, calm and methodical, explaining to Grace how to make the bankruptcy filing look legitimate. The key is to file it fast, before she has time to gather counter-evidence. Hit her on Monday morning, make it public, let the media run with the story of the estranged daughter who took advantage of her generous sister. By the time she proves it's false, the BLM contract will be gone, and her reputation will be destroyed. No one will want to work with someone who's been accused of defrauding family, even if it's eventually disproven.
Grace's voice on the recordings was even worse. She sounded gleeful, almost giggling as she described how she'd been planning this since I refused to come home 3 years ago. "She thinks she's so smart, building her little company, acting like she doesn't need us. But she's still just Whitney, still the one who could never quite measure up. After this, she'll have nothing. She'll have to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness, begging for a job. Maybe I'll hire her as a janitor." Her laugh made me physically sick. By Sunday night, we had everything. 100 pages of evidence proving the bankruptcy petition was fraudulent, expert testimony lined up, financial records showing I'd never received a penny from my family after leaving home, a paper trail of harassment and corporate espionage going back 3 years. But Emily Castro brought up the crucial point. We can't just wait for them to file and then respond. That puts us on the defensive, and even with all this evidence, bankruptcy judges tend to err on the side of caution. They might freeze Summit Guard's assets while they investigate, which would achieve exactly what your family wants. So what do? I asked, exhausted from 3 days of non-stop work. Emily's smile was pure predator. We file first. Tomorrow morning, before they can file their fraudulent bankruptcy petition, we file for a declaratory judgment and an emergency injunction. We lay out their entire scheme, present our evidence, and ask the court to bar them from filing any claims against you or Summit Guard. We turn their ambush into our opportunity. She pulled up a draft motion on her laptop. I've been preparing this while you all gathered evidence. 53 pages of legal fury that will not only stop their plan, but expose them to criminal prosecution for bankruptcy fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Christopher's cousin from the BLM had been quiet most of the weekend, just observing and occasionally asking for clarification. Finally, he spoke up. You know, if this goes public, if the court filing shows what Larson Development and Mountain Environmental Solutions have been doing, they'll be blacklisted from federal contracts for years, maybe permanently. The government doesn't play around with fraud, especially not fraud targeting federal contractors. Good, I said, and I meant it. Every ounce of compassion I might have once had for my family had evaporated listening to those recordings, seeing the calculated cruelty of their plan. They want to destroy me for the crime of existing without their permission. They deserve whatever consequences come from this. We filed our motion at 8 a.m. Monday morning, exactly 1 hour before Grace was scheduled to file her fraudulent bankruptcy petition. David had asked for an emergency hearing, citing the imminent threat to a federal contractor's ability to bid on critical infrastructure projects. We got lucky. Judge Patricia Quinn was available and agreed to hear our case that afternoon. She had a reputation for having zero tolerance for legal manipulation and an almost supernatural ability to spot lies. At 9:15 a.m., my phone exploded with calls and texts. Grace first, screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "What did you do? What did you do?" Then my mother, her voice cold and controlled. "Whitney, this is a mistake. Whatever you think you're accomplishing, you're only hurting yourself. We can still fix this if you withdraw your filing now." Finally, my father, not even trying to hide his rage. "You ungrateful little bitch, you have no idea what you've just started. I will bury you. You think you've won something? You've just signed your company's death warrant." I didn't respond to any of them. Emily had advised complete silence until the hearing. Let them panic. Let them scramble. Let them wonder how much we knew. By noon, their lawyers had filed an emergency response, denying everything and claiming I was trying to preemptively silence legitimate creditors out of desperation. They were still trying to push their narrative, still thinking they could bully their way through this like they had everything else. The federal courthouse in Denver was one of those modern buildings that tried to look imposing and just ended up looking cold. Emily and I arrived early, setting up our presentation materials in the courtroom. She'd brought 3 assistants to handle the volume of evidence we needed to present. I wore my best suit, the one I'd bought with my first real Summit Guard profit, not a hand-me-down or a gift with strings attached. My hands were steady as I arranged papers, but my heart was trying to escape through my throat. Then they walked in. My parents, Grace, and a phalanx of lawyers led by Harrison Pike himself. My father looked older than I remembered, his perfect CEO facade cracking around the edges. My mother was porcelain perfect as always, but her hands shook slightly as she clutched her purse. And Grace looked at me with such pure hatred that I actually took a step back. She was wearing a conservative black suit, trying to look like the responsible businesswoman, the creditor who'd been taken advantage of by her ungrateful sister. "All rise,"
the bailiff announced, and Judge Quinn entered. She was in her 60s, gray-haired, with eyes that seemed to catalog everything in seconds. She sat down and immediately addressed the room. "I've reviewed the preliminary filings. This is clearly a family dispute that's escalated to an unfortunate degree. However, the allegations on both sides are serious enough to warrant immediate attention." She looked at Emily. "Ms. Castro, since your client filed first, you may present your case." Emily stood, and for the next 2 hours, she methodically destroyed my family's scheme. She presented each piece of evidence like she was building a wall, brick by damning brick. The forged signatures blown up on a screen with the forensic handwriting expert's analysis overlaid. The fake bank records with the impossible account numbers highlighted. The spoofed emails with their metadata exposed. And then the recordings. My father's voice filled the courtroom, clear and undeniable, explaining how to commit fraud against his own daughter. Grace's laughter echoed off the walls as she described her plan to force me to come begging. My mother could be heard in the background of one recording, suggesting they make the loan amount higher to ensure I couldn't possibly fight it. Every word was a nail in their coffin, and Judge Quinn's expression grew stonier with each passing minute.
When it was Harrison Pike's turn to respond, he tried every trick in his very expensive book. He questioned the authenticity of the recordings, suggested I had manipulated the evidence, painted me as a desperate entrepreneur trying to escape legitimate debts. He even tried to bring up my history of mental instability, referencing some teenage therapy I'd had when I was 16 and depressed because my family treated me like furniture. But for every attack, Emily had a counter. Every lie he told, she had documentation to disprove. It was like watching a master chess player slowly corner an opponent who'd thought they were playing checkers. The moment I knew we'd won was when Pike tried to present the promissory note as evidence. Judge Quinn asked to examine it personally, then called for a 15-minute recess. When she returned, she had a court handwriting expert with her. "Mr. Pike," she said slowly, "are you aware that presenting forged documents to the court is a felony? Because this expert has just confirmed what Miss Castro's expert stated. This signature is not authentic. Would you like to reconsider your position?" The courtroom was silent. Pike looked at my father, who looked at Grace, who was slowly turning pale. "Your Honor," Pike started, but Judge Quinn cut him off. "I've heard enough. Not only is there no evidence of any legitimate debt between Miss Irwin and Miss Larson, but there is overwhelming evidence of an orchestrated attempt to use the bankruptcy system as a weapon against a competitor. This is one of the most egregious cases of bad faith litigation I've encountered in 30 years on the bench." She turned to my family. "You should be deeply ashamed. You've perverted both family bonds and the legal system in pursuit of what appears to be nothing more than petty jealousy and corporate greed." But she wasn't done. The judge looked directly at Grace, who was now shaking visibly. "Miss Larson, based on what I've heard today, I'm referring this matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. Bankruptcy fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, these are serious federal crimes. I suggest you retain criminal counsel immediately." Then to my parents, "Mr. and Mrs. Larson, you may not have signed the fraudulent documents, but those recordings make you co-conspirators. You should also seek criminal counsel."
She turned back to Emily and me. "Miss Castro, your request for a declaratory judgment is granted. Miss Irwin and Summit Guard Technologies have no debt obligation to any member of the Larson family. Furthermore, I'm issuing a permanent injunction barring the Larsons or any entity controlled by them from filing any civil claims against Miss Irwin or her company without prior court approval. This injunction extends to any form of harassment, defamation, or interference with Miss Irwin's business operations." She paused, looking at me with something that might have been sympathy. "Miss Irwin, you're free to pursue your federal contracts without further interference from these parties. I wish you success." The gavel came down like thunder, and just like that, it was over. Or rather, the civil part was over.
The criminal part was just beginning, and we all knew it. As we gathered our materials, Grace broke away from her lawyers and approached me, her face twisted with rage. "You think you've won? You've destroyed our family, your own family. For what? For some pathetic company that won't even exist in 5 years?" I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. She wasn't the golden child anymore. She was just a spoiled, entitled woman who'd never been told no, who'd never had to earn anything, who was about to face federal charges because she couldn't stand the thought of me succeeding without her permission. "Grace," I said quietly, "we haven't been family for a long time. Family doesn't try to destroy each other. Family doesn't steal, lie, and commit fraud. You're not my sister. You're just someone who happened to share my childhood home." My father tried to approach, his CEO authority crumbling, but Emily stepped between us. "Mr. Larson, I'd advise you not to speak to my client. Anything you say can and will be used in the criminal proceedings." He looked over her shoulder at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing money or reputation, but fear of consequences he couldn't buy his way out of. As we left the courthouse, the October sun was setting, painting the Denver skyline in shades of gold and amber. Christopher was waiting outside, along with Sarah Chen and the rest of our team. The BLM proposal was due in 18 hours, and we still had work to do. But for the first time in 5 years, I could work without looking over my shoulder, without wondering what sabotage was coming next, without the weight of my family's disapproval crushing every achievement. That night, as we put the finishing touches on the proposal that would transform Summit Guard Technologies into a major federal contractor, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Martha. "Saw the news about the hearing. I'm proud of you. Your real family would be too. The one you've built, not the one you were born into. Now go win that contract and show them what Whitney Irwin can really do."
The 18 hours between the courthouse victory and the BLM proposal deadline blurred together in a caffeine-fueled marathon that felt like running through quicksand while solving calculus equations in my head. My team and I refined every section, double-checked every number, and polished every technical specification until the proposal gleamed with the kind of precision that only comes from years of being told you're not good enough. We submitted it at 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the deadline, and then we collapsed in our conference room like soldiers after a battle, pizza boxes and energy drink cans scattered around us like spent ammunition. 3 weeks later, while we waited to hear about the contract, the criminal investigation began in earnest. The U.S. Attorney's Office didn't mess around with bankruptcy fraud, especially not when it involved attempts to manipulate federal contracting processes. The lead prosecutor, a woman named Jessica Reeves, who looked like she could stare down a hurricane and make it apologize, called me in for a full day of testimony. I sat in that federal building for 9 hours, going through every piece of evidence, every interaction, every moment of the past 5 years when my family had tried to destroy what I was building. By the end, I felt hollowed out, but cleaner somehow, like I'd finally purged poison I'd been carrying in my bloodstream. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected, probably because my family had been so arrogant they hadn't covered their tracks well. The FBI found emails on Grace's computer where she literally discussed the forgery plans with the specialist they'd hired. They found bank records showing payments to that specialist from Mountain Environmental Solutions accounts, creating a direct financial trail. They found messages between my parents coordinating the timing of the fraudulent filing to cause maximum damage to my federal contract bid. It was like they'd created a how to commit federal crimes handbook and left it lying around for anyone to find. Grace was arrested on a Tuesday morning in November. Someone at Larson Development filmed it on their phone and leaked it to the media. Grace being led out of the building in handcuffs, her perfect composure finally shattered, mascara running down her cheeks as she screamed that this was all a mistake, that I was the real criminal, that she was being set up. The video went viral in Utah business circles within hours. The golden child of Larson Development, the chosen successor, the one who could do no wrong, being arrested for trying to destroy her own sister's company through federal crimes. The local news ate it up like starving wolves finding a steakhouse. My parents weren't arrested, but they were brought in for questioning repeatedly. Their lawyers managed to keep them out of handcuffs, but not out of the headlines. Larson Development founders investigated in fraud scheme ran across the front page of the Utah Business Journal. Then came the civil lawsuits from investors who claimed they'd been deceived about Mountain Environmental Solutions' technology origins. Then the IRS started looking into those questionable real estate deals Sarah Chen had uncovered. Then the SEC got interested in some irregular financial disclosures. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, each one triggering three more, the entire empire collapsing under the weight of its own corruption. The call about the BLM contract came on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing code with Marcus. My phone rang with a blocked number, and Christopher's cousin's voice came through clear and professional. Miss Irwin, I'm calling to officially inform you that Summit Guard Technologies has been selected as the primary contractor for the Bureau of Land Management's Integrated Environmental Monitoring System. Congratulations! This is a 5-year contract with an initial value of $127 million, with options for extension based on performance.
I set the phone down very carefully, looked at Marcus, and said, "We got it." Then I started crying. Not sad tears or even purely happy tears, but something more complex. Relief and vindication and exhaustion and triumph all mixed together into something that felt like my chest might explode. Marcus started whooping, and within seconds the entire office was in chaos. 12 people who'd bet everything on a company started in a studio apartment were suddenly looking at a future where we could hire 50 more people, where we could build the technology we'd only dreamed about, where we could make a real difference in protecting the environment while also, finally, being financially secure. That night, Christopher took me to the fanciest restaurant in Denver, the kind of place where they have a different fork for every course and the waiter explains each dish like it's a doctoral thesis. Halfway through dinner, he raised his champagne glass and said, "To Whitney Irwin, who built an empire from spite and determination and showed everyone that the best revenge isn't living well, it's living well while your enemies get federal prison sentences." We laughed until other diners stared at us, but I didn't care. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't care what anyone thought of me, except the people who'd earned the right to an opinion. Grace's trial was set for March, but she never made it that far. In January, faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of 15 years in federal prison, she took a plea deal. She pled guilty to conspiracy to commit bankruptcy fraud and 1 count of forgery, accepting a sentence of 2 years in federal prison, 3 years of supervised probation, and $500,000 in fines. But the real punishment came from our father. Richard Larson, trying desperately to save what was left of his empire and his reputation, publicly disowned her. He removed her from the succession plan, wrote her out of his will except for a minimal trust fund, and banned her from any involvement in family businesses. I found out about the disownment from Martha, who called me the day it happened. "He did it in front of the entire board," she said, and I could hear something like pity in her voice. Told them that Grace had acted alone, against family values, and that she was no longer considered part of Larson Development's future. She was sitting right there, Whitney. She just crumbled, like watching a building implode. Your mother tried to object, but Richard shut her down, said the family had to protect itself from criminal liability. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for Grace, but I couldn't quite manage it. She'd made her choices, calculated and cruel, and now she was facing consequences, for probably the first time in her life. But I did feel something when Martha told me what happened next. After the meeting, Grace tried to call you. Did you know that? She wanted to apologize, to explain, maybe to beg. Your number was blocked on her phone. She just sat there in the conference room, holding her dead phone, realizing she had no way to reach you anymore. That's when she finally understood what she'd lost. Mountain Environmental Solutions folded 2 months later.
Without my stolen code to build on, without my understanding of the underlying systems, and with their reputation destroyed by the fraud scandal, they couldn't deliver on their contracts. The Forest Service terminated their agreement and sued for damages. 3 other clients followed suit. The subsidiary that was supposed to be the future of Larson Development became the anchor that dragged it under. By April, my father was quietly shopping the company around to potential buyers, trying to get out before the complete collapse.
The buyer ended up being a consortium from California that specialized in distressed asset acquisition. They paid 30 cents on the dollar for what had once been valued at over $400 million. The Larson name was stripped from every property, every development, every trace of the empire my father had spent 40 years building. He kept his personal assets, the house, the cars, the art collection, but the company that had defined him, that had been worth destroying his daughter over, was gone. He was just another retired real estate guy in Utah, rich but irrelevant, powerful in the past tense. My mother called me once during all of this, in February, while Grace was in federal custody awaiting sentencing. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it, like she was calling from very far away, even though I knew she was just in Park City. "Whitney, I know you don't want to hear from me. I know we've lost the right to call you daughter, but I need you to know that I see it now. What we did to you, what we let happen, what we encouraged. We had 2 daughters, and we threw one away because she didn't fit the plan we'd made before you were even born. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I know. I understand now what we lost, and it wasn't a company or money or reputation. We lost you, and you were the only thing actually worth keeping." I listened to her entire speech without interrupting, then said, "Catherine, I appreciate you saying that, but understanding now, after I've succeeded despite you, after Grace is going to prison, after your empire has collapsed, that's not growth, that's just regret for consequences. You don't get to have an epiphany now that the cost has come due. Please don't contact me again." I hung up and blocked her number, along with my father's, along with every connection to the Larson family except Martha, who'd earned her place through courage when it mattered. Summit Guard grew exponentially after the BLM contract. We hired 62 new employees in 6 months, opened offices in Portland, Phoenix, and Boise. Our environmental monitoring systems were deployed across 11 states, protecting millions of acres of federal land from fires, floods, and human damage. We were featured in Wired, in Fast Company, in the Wall Street Journal, not as Richard Larson's estranged daughter's company, but as the innovative firm revolutionizing environmental protection through artificial intelligence. I was invited to speak at conferences, to testify before Congress about the importance of technology and conservation, to consult with other agencies about expanding our systems internationally. Christopher and I bought a house in the mountains outside Denver, nothing as ostentatious as the Larson estate in Park City, but perfect for us. It had a home office where I could work while watching the sunrise paint the peaks gold, a kitchen where Christopher could indulge his stress-baking habit, and a guest room that Mrs. Chen, my savior neighbor from the early days, used when she visited. We got married again, a real wedding this time, with our chosen family present, the people who'd stood by us when standing by us meant something. Marcus was Christopher's best man. Emily Castro was my maid of honor, which she said was the first time anyone had asked a lawyer to stand up at their wedding for destroying their enemies in court. The day Grace reported to federal prison, I was in Washington, D.C., signing a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Interior to expand Summit Guard services to all federal lands management agencies. It was a moment I dreamed about in those early days of eating ramen and coding until my eyes burned, but I couldn't fully celebrate it. That night, alone in my hotel room, I pulled up Grace's booking photo on my laptop. She looked hollow, scared, nothing like the golden child who'd whispered poison in my ear about being adorable for trying. I stared at that photo for a long time, waiting to feel vindication or satisfaction, or even just closure. Instead, I felt tired.
tired of carrying anger, tired of defining myself in opposition to them, tired of letting people who chose to hurt me take up space in my head.
I closed the laptop and called Christopher. "I want to have a baby," I said without preamble. He laughed, surprised. "Okay, that's a conversation shift, but I'm listening." We talked for 3 hours about the future, about building something that had nothing to do with revenge or proving anyone wrong, about creating a family based on love and support, and choosing each other every day. By the time we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd finally set down luggage I'd been carrying since I was 7 years old. Our daughter was born 14 months later, in September, while the aspens were turning gold on the mountains. We named her Presley, after Elvis, because Christopher had a weird obsession, but also because it meant Priest's Meadow, which felt appropriate for a child born in Colorado to parents who'd found sanctuary in building something new. She had my dark hair and Christopher's calm disposition, and holding her for the first time, I made her a promise that I've kept every day since. "You will never have to earn our love," I whispered to her tiny, perfect face. "You will never be compared to anyone else. You will never be told you're not enough. You can be whoever you want to be, a scientist, an artist, a teacher, a dreamer, and we will celebrate you, not your achievements, not your potential, not your usefulness to some family legacy. You, just you, always you." Summit Guard went public 3 years later. The IPO valued the company at $2.3 billion, making me, at 34, one of the youngest female billionaire tech founders in the country. The financial press loved the story: the environmental engineer who'd built an empire from nothing, the CEO who'd revolutionized federal land management, the entrepreneur who'd started in a studio apartment and now employed over 400 people across 7 states. They never mentioned the Larson name, because I never told them about it. That wasn't my story anymore. Grace was released from prison after serving 18 months of her 2-year sentence. She tried to rebuild, moving to Texas where the Larson name meant nothing, starting a small consulting firm that failed within a year. The last I heard, she was working as a project manager for a mid-sized development company in Houston, using her married name, trying to disappear into middle management. My father sold the Park City estate and moved to a golf community in Scottsdale, where he could pretend he'd retired by choice rather than necessity. My mother stayed in Utah, volunteering with charities and trying to rebuild some kind of social standing, though the whispers followed her everywhere. I saw them once more, all 3 of them, purely by chance. It was at a conference in San Francisco where I was giving the keynote about using AI to predict and prevent environmental disasters. I was walking through the hotel lobby, Presley on my hip, Christopher beside me carrying her diaper bag like it was a briefcase full of nuclear codes, and there they were, sitting in the lobby bar. My parents looked older, smaller, like expensive clothes hanging on frames that had shrunk. Grace was with them, but she was standing slightly apart, like she wasn't sure she was still welcome in their orbit. Grace saw me first. Her face went through a series of expressions: shock, shame, something that might have been longing before settling into a careful blankness. She nudged my mother, who looked up and gasped audibly. My father was the last to notice, and when he did, he started to stand, his mouth opening to say something. But I was already past them. Presley babbling happily about the pretty lights in the lobby chandeliers, Christopher's hand warm on my back. I didn't stop, didn't acknowledge them, didn't give them even a moment of recognition. They were strangers who happened to share some DNA and memories I was still sometimes sorting through in therapy. But Grace followed me. I heard her heels clicking on the marble floor, getting closer, and then her voice, smaller and more uncertain than I'd ever heard it. "Whitney, please, can I see her? Your daughter? Just for a moment?" I stopped then, turned around, and looked at the sister who'd tried to destroy me. She was thin in an unhealthy way, her designer clothes hanging wrong, her perfectly styled hair unable to hide the fact that she'd aged a decade in 3 years. "Her name is Presley," I said evenly. "And no, you can't. You don't get to be part of her life. You don't get to be the aunt who might whisper poison in her ear about not being enough. You don't get to teach her that family is about competition and hierarchy and destroying anyone who threatens your position. I'm different now, Grace said, and there were tears in her eyes. Prison changes you. Losing everything changes you. I understand what I did, what we all did to you. I'm sorry. I'm so, so sorry. And maybe she was. Maybe prison had taught her empathy. Maybe losing her golden child status had shown her what it felt like to be invisible. Maybe she really had changed, but it didn't matter. Grace, I said, shifting Presley higher on my hip, I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. I forgive you because carrying anger at you is like drinking poison and expecting you to die from it. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean you get to be part of my life or my daughter's life. It just means I'm not going to let what you did define my future anymore. I looked past her to where my parents were watching, frozen in place like they were afraid to move. That goes for all of you. You're forgiven. You're also forgotten. Please don't approach my family again. I walked away then, really walked away, with my husband and my daughter and the knowledge that I'd built something they could never take from me. Not the company, though that was part of it, not the money, though that was nice to have, but the life. The real, authentic, chosen family, earned success life, where love wasn't conditional on performance and support wasn't dependent on maintaining hierarchy, where my daughter would grow up knowing she was enough just by existing, where my employees knew their ideas mattered regardless of their last names, where merit actually meant something and hard work actually paid off. That night, after Presley was asleep in the hotel crib, I stood on the balcony overlooking San Francisco Bay and thought about that 22-year-old girl who'd walked into her father's office with a business plan and hope that maybe, finally, she'd be seen. She had no idea she'd have to lose everything to gain everything. She had no idea that being dismissed would lead to being undismissible. She had no idea that Grace's cruelty would ultimately be the catalyst for a life bigger and better than anything the Larson legacy could have offered. "You okay?" Christopher asked, joining me on the balcony with 2 glasses of wine. "Yeah," I said, and meant it. "I was just thinking about how grateful I am." "For the company? The success?" "No," I said, taking a sip of wine and leaning into his warmth. "For them, for my family, for their rejection and cruelty and attempts to destroy me, because if they'd just given me that initial investment, if they'd just pretended to support me, I'd probably still be there, accepting crumbs and calling it a feast, letting Grace take credit for my work, letting my father control my future. Their cruelty set me free. Their betrayal made me bulletproof. Their attempts to destroy me just taught me how to be indestructible." Christopher kissed the top of my head. "That's a hell of a thank you card. Thanks for the trauma, it made me a billionaire." I laughed, real and deep and free. Maybe I should send them one. Or maybe living well, raising Presley well, building something that matters, maybe that's thank you enough. We stood there watching the lights on the bay, and I thought about Martha's flash drive, about Mrs. Chen's backup, about Sarah Chen's investigation, about Emily Castro's legal brilliance, about Marcus's loyalty, about everyone who'd chosen to stand with me when standing with me meant standing against power and money and established systems. That was family. That was what the Larsons, for all their wealth and influence, had never understood. Family isn't about blood or names or inheritance. It's about who shows up when showing up is hard. It's about who believes in you when you barely believe in yourself. It's about who fights beside you when the fight seems impossible. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus back in Denver. Local news just ran a story about Summit Guard's new climate prediction model. They called you Colorado's tech superhero. Also, that reporter asked if you're related to the Utah Larsons. I told him I'd never heard of them. That okay? I showed the text to Christopher, who laughed. "Perfect response," he said. I typed back, "Never heard of them either. See you Monday for the NASA meeting." Because that was the ultimate revenge, wasn't it? Not their destruction, though they'd certainly achieved that themselves. Not their criminal records, though Grace would carry that felony forever.
Not even their financial ruin, though watching the empire fall had been satisfying. The ultimate revenge was erasure. They'd tried to erase me from the family narrative, to make me invisible, to deny my existence had value. And in the end, I'd erased them right back. They were footnotes in a story that was no longer about them. They were the villains in the first act of a 5-act play where they didn't even appear in the finale. Summit Guard is worth over $4 billion now. We have contracts with NASA, the UN, the European Space Agency. We're protecting forests in Brazil, monitoring glaciers in Greenland, preventing disasters before they happen. Presley is 5 and already asking questions about why mommy's computers can see fires before they start. Christopher has his own structural engineering firm that consults on climate-resilient building design. Mrs. Chen comes for dinner every Sunday, and Marcus is Presley's godfather, and Emily Castro sends champagne every year on the anniversary of the court victory. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm coding something particularly complex or reviewing contracts for another expansion, I think about Grace sitting in her Houston apartment, probably in some generic complex with beige walls and neighbors she doesn't know. I wonder if she thinks about me, about what we could have been if she'd chosen differently. I wonder if my parents, in their separate retirements, ever look at what Summit Guard has become and realize they could have been part of it, could have been proud grandparents instead of cautionary tales. I wonder if they understand that they had 2 daughters with extraordinary potential, and they destroyed one while the other destroyed herself trying to be the only one.
But mostly, I don't think about them at all. Mostly, I think about the next innovation, the next contract, the next way to use technology to protect the planet. I think about Presley's laugh and Christopher's terrible dad jokes, and the team I've built who've become family. I think about the mountains outside my window and the code on my screen and the satisfaction of building something that matters. I think about the girl who sat crying on an apartment floor with a stolen laptop and promised herself she'd make them regret it, and how she had no idea that the best revenge would be forgetting they existed at all. The Larsons tried to bury me. They didn't know I was a seed, and now I've grown into something they could never have imagined, surrounded by people they could never have controlled, building a legacy they could never have stolen. They gave me their worst, and I turned it into my best. They tried to break me, and I became unbreakable. They tried to erase me, and I became indelible. And in the end, that's not even revenge anymore. That's just victory. Complete, total, and entirely mine. So, if you're wondering whether revenge is worth it, whether fighting back against family who tries to destroy you is justified, whether building something from spite and determination can lead to something beautiful, the answer is yes. But the real revenge isn't in their downfall or their criminal records or their empire's collapse. The real revenge is in the life you build after they're gone, the family you choose over the one you were born into, the success that has nothing to do with proving them wrong and everything to do with proving yourself right. The real revenge is looking at your daughter and knowing she'll never doubt her worth, building a company where merit matters more than names, and creating a world where chosen family and integrity matter more than blood ties and old money. The Larsons gave me their name, their rejection, their cruelty, and their betrayal. In return, I gave them nothing. Not my attention, not my anger, not my energy, not my future. I gave them the one thing a family like the Larsons can't stand, the one thing that hurts more than any lawsuit or criminal charge or financial ruin. I gave them irrelevance. And that, more than anything else, is the revenge that keeps on giving. So, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest in the comments. Do you think Whitney went too far? Should she have given Grace that second chance when she begged to meet Presley? Or did the Larsons get exactly what they deserved for trying to destroy their own daughter with forged documents and federal crimes? Because I've been telling this story for an hour, and I still can't decide if Whitney let them off too easy. Drop your verdict in the comments below. I read every single one, and some of your perspectives have completely changed how I see these situations. And look, if this story hit you the way it hit me, if you felt that satisfaction when Grace got arrested, if you got chills when Whitney told her family they were forgiven but forgotten, if you understand what it's like to be underestimated by the people who should believe in you most, then smash that like button right now. It tells me you want more stories like this, more tales of underdogs who became overlords, more proof that sometimes the best revenge really is massive success. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. We all know someone dealing with toxic family, someone being told they're not good enough, someone whose relatives are trying to dim their light. Send them Whitney's story. Let them know that walking away from blood relatives who treat you like competition instead of family isn't betrayal, it's self-preservation. Sometimes people need permission to choose themselves, and this story might be exactly what they need to hear. If you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because next week I'm bringing you another family betrayal that ended in criminal charges, this time involving a son who discovered his parents had been stealing his identity since he was 12. The FBI raid footage alone is worth the wait. Until next time, remember, family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up when showing up is hard. And sometimes the family that tries to bury you just ends up fertilizing your growth. See you in the next one.